The galaxy cast them out. Humanity gave them a home. The ship came in without a signal. No approach beacon, no docking request, no identification code. Just a mass on the sensor screen, growing fast, and then a voice on the emergency channel that was so broken by static I could barely make out the words. I was alone at the operations desk of Waystation Threshold, 3 in the morning by station time, and my coffee had gone cold an hour ago. My name is Owen Garrett. I push docking permits for a living. That night, I made the worst and best decision of my life in about 4 seconds. I granted the dock. The ship that came through our outer airlock was a wreck. The hull was scorched black along the port side. 2 of its 4 engine nacelles were completely dark, and there was a long tear across the cargo bay doors that had been welded shut with something that looked like it was done in a hurry by someone who was shaking. The registry number was still readable. Velhari civilian transport, the Aethris leaving. Life signs inside, 312 of them, crammed into a vessel rated for 80. I had maybe 40 minutes before the Morath patrol ship on the far side of my sensor range noticed what had just docked. The Velhari are avian, tall, light-boned, with feathers that shift color depending on their emotional state, and wide golden eyes that reflect light the way a cat's do in the dark. They are, or were, a full member species of the Galactic Concord. 11 years ago, the Concord ruled that the mineral wealth under their homeworld belonged to the Collective Development Trust, not to them. The Velhari voted against it. They lost by 1 procedural motion. When they refused to comply with extraction orders, their membership was suspended pending review. The review was still pending. Without membership, Concord law held that they had no legal standing, no rights, no status. They were, on paper, no one. The Morath enforced Concord decisions. They were very good at it. I went down to the dock myself because I needed to see it. I needed it to be real and not just numbers on a screen. When the inner airlock door slid open, the smell hit me first. Recycled air pushed past its limits, something medicinal, and underneath it all the particular heaviness of too many living creatures in too small a space. They were packed into every corridor, sitting against the walls, some of them lying flat. Children made sounds I did not need a translator to understand. An elder near the door watched me with those golden eyes, and her feathers had gone the color of ash. A woman came forward from the crowd. She moved carefully, like someone who had learned to conserve every movement. Her feathers were dark gray at the tips, and her translator implant pulsed blue at her temple. Her name, she told me, was Thesavi. She had been the ship's senior matriarch, and now she was whatever a matriarch becomes when the ship is the last thing her people own. She did not ask me for anything. She looked at me and said, very simply, "We were told no species would protect us, that it is not done." I told her to give me 20 minutes. The Morath hail came in at 3:47. The captain's name, as translated by my console, was Commander Veth Karan, and he was exceedingly polite. He explained that the vessel now docked at Waystation Threshold contained 312 unregistered entities under Concord jurisdiction. He explained that under Concord Directive 114, all unregistered entities found outside their declared holding zones must be remanded to Concord Authority for processing. He used the word processing 4 times in 90 seconds. He assured me this was routine. I knew what processing meant. Everyone on the fringe knew. You do not spend 7 years working the edge of Concord space without learning which words have soft outsides and hard insides. Humanity had applied for Concord membership 3 times. The first application was rejected on the grounds that human governance structures change too frequently to guarantee consistent treaty adherence. The second was rejected because our conflict index, the number of armed disputes per century, was statistically the highest of any spacefaring species at the time. The third was rejected because, and I am quoting directly from the Concord Committee report, the human species demonstrates a pattern of cultural volatility, incompatible with the sustained diplomatic continuity required of full membership. We were given observer status, 3 seats at the back, no vote. They were not wrong about us exactly. We do change governments constantly. We do argue with each other endlessly. We spent the first 10,000 years of our history making every mistake it is possible to make about who counts as a person. We drew lines and called people on the other side of them something less than human. We built systems to keep certain people out. We got very good at paperwork that made cruelty sound like procedure. And then, slowly, at enormous cost, we started to remember. My great-grandmother came across the Mediterranean in a rubber boat when she was 19. She made it. A lot of people she crossed with did not. She spent the rest of her life making sure her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren knew exactly what that crossing felt like, what it looked like when a government decided a person was not a person, what it sounded like when an official voice explained, very politely, that the processing would be routine. She did not let us forget. None of the families who carried those stories let anyone forget. I opened the channel to Commander Velhari and I told him that the individuals aboard the Aethris leaving were under the protection of the United Nations Space Authority. I told him that Waystation Threshold was human-administered territory, and that I was invoking emergency humanitarian shelter, effective immediately. I told him that if the Concord wished to remove these individuals, they would need to go through us. He was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, with genuine curiosity and no particular malice, what exactly going through us would mean for a way station with a staff of 11 and 2 docking tugboats. I said I supposed we would find out together. Then I sent the message home. I did not send it to the UNSA High Council or to any government office. There was no time for committees. I sent it on the general emergency frequency, which every human ship, station, colony, and relay beacon monitors automatically. I kept it short. I said, 312 Velhari civilians, political refugees, seeking asylum at Waystation Threshold. Concord enforcement vessel holding position. We need to be seen. What happened next is the part that still makes my chest tight when I think about it. 6 hours later, a colony transport called the Harwick Dawn, which had been on a routine supply run to the outer belt, changed course. It was now 3 hours out from Threshold, moving slowly, broadcasting its registry number loudly and continuously. Its captain was a woman named Laura Finch who I had never met, and who sent me exactly one message: on our way. A mining cooperative security vessel, the kind that normally chases off asteroid poachers, repositioned itself to just within Threshold's sensor shadow. Crew of 9. Its armament was suited for deterrence, not war. It did not fire anything. It just sat there, broadcasting its presence. A retired UNSA admiral named George Calloway, who had no official role or authority of any kind, opened a private channel to Commander Velhari. I do not know what he said. The channel log I later obtained showed a 17-minute connection during which George Calloway said nothing at all. He breathed, steadily, for 17 minutes. Velhari never closed the channel. A cargo hauler diverted 2 days off its route for no reason it was legally required to explain. Then another. A science survey ship with 4 crew members and instruments for measuring stellar radiation came to a stop 12,000 kilometers from Threshold, and also broadcast its registry. A passenger liner, carrying 400 people who had paid for direct transit and were now going to arrive late, sent a single-line message to Threshold's general inbox: "We are here." The Concord filed a formal diplomatic protest within 8 hours. Sanctions were mentioned. Trade disruptions were mentioned. My name was mentioned specifically, which I took as evidence that I had done something real. And then 3 other species applied for asylum at Waystation Threshold: the Rithani, the Kos, and the Thuval. All 3 had lost Concord membership in the past 100 years over various disputes. All 3 had been living in a kind of gray legal space that the Concord preferred not to look at directly. They had watched everything happening on the open emergency frequency. They sent their applications in plain text, simply formatted with nothing fancy. Just names and numbers and the word please. I was still at my desk. I had not slept. One of my colleagues, a young man named Eli Marsh who handled cargo manifests and had never been involved in anything more dramatic than a misfiled customs form, brought me a fresh coffee without being asked, and then sat down next to me and just stayed. He did not say anything useful or profound. He just stayed. Thesavi found me in the observation lounge at 5 in the morning. I was watching the sensor screen, watching all those vessel signatures sitting in space around us, watching the Morith ship that had not moved and had not fired and had not left. The stars were doing what stars always do, which is nothing, but they looked different that morning. Everything looked slightly different. She sat beside me. Her feathers had shifted from ash gray to something closer to pale gold, which I was learning meant something like careful hope. She looked at the sensor screen for a while without speaking. Then she asked me why humans do this. She was not accusing me of anything. She genuinely wanted to understand the mechanism. Her people had a concept of sanctuary, but it was built on reciprocal treaties and formal agreements and centuries of negotiation. What she had just watched was something else. People who had nothing to gain had rerouted their ships. People with families aboard passenger liners had voted with their navigation computers. A retired old man had breathed on an open channel for 17 minutes as if breathing itself was a statement. She said, "We did not know you would do this." I thought about it for a long time. Outside, the stars sat still and the ships kept broadcasting, and the Morith vessel kept not moving. I thought about my great-grandmother on her rubber boat. I thought about all the times in history when someone had decided that a particular group of people was not technically people according to whatever paperwork currently existed, and what that had cost, and what it had looked like from the outside. I said, I do not think it is generosity. I think it is recognition. We have been on both sides of this. We spent a very long time being the ones who drew the lines and decided who was inside them, and we have not forgotten what we looked like when we did that. It turns out that shame, if you let it teach you something instead of just crushing you, becomes a kind of instinct. You see the shape of a thing, you recognize it, and then you do not need a committee meeting to know which side of it you want to be on. Thesavi was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your people were rejected from the Concord for cultural instability." I said yes. She said, "Perhaps what they were measuring was not instability. Perhaps what they were measuring was unresolved argument, a species that has not finished arguing with itself about who matters." I did not have an answer to that. I am not sure one was needed. The Morith ship withdrew 19 hours after it had first hailed us. No official reason was given. The diplomatic channels were full of careful language about procedural reviews and jurisdictional clarification. What the careful language did not say, but what everyone understood, was that a warship besieging a way station full of refugees while human vessels quietly gathered in the surrounding space had become a story the Concord did not want to be the subject of. 312 Velhari were not worth that story. The Velhari stayed at threshold for 4 months while a legal framework was built. It was messy and imperfect and argued over endlessly, and nothing like what any of the lawyers wanted. Several Concord members protested formally. 2 human colony systems got into a public dispute about who had agreed to take in how many of the Rathani families. A senator from the Northern European bloc gave a speech about sovereignty that made the news for a week. A different senator gave a speech about memory that made the news for a month. A colony called Harrow's Landing, a small settlement on a marginal world that had been struggling for funding for 6 years, formally volunteered to serve as primary resettlement ground for the Velhari. They sent a message to the UNSA resettlement office explaining their reasoning in one sentence: "We have room, and we remember what it is like when no one makes room for you." The day the Velhari boarded their relocation transport, Thesavi came to find me one last time. She looked different from the night she had arrived. Not lighter exactly, but present in a way she had not been when she stepped off the Aethris leaving. Her feathers were the deep gold of late afternoon on a world with a warm sun. She stood in the airlock corridor and looked at me for a moment before she spoke. She said, "We were told that the galaxy had no place for us, that the rules were clear, and the decisions had been made, and the universe does not rearrange itself for the inconvenient." I said yes, I had heard that argument. She said, "You did not rearrange the universe. You just decided the rules were wrong, and stood still while everyone found out if you meant it." I told her that standing still while people find out if you mean it is more or less the entire history of humanity in 4 words. She made a sound that the translator rendered as something like laughter, or its equivalent in a species that does not laugh the way we do. Then she walked down the corridor and through the airlock, and I watched her transport pull away from the dock and turn toward whatever came next. I was formally reprimanded by the UNSA Oversight Committee 3 weeks later. The reprimand was 3 paragraphs long and noted that I had acted outside my authority and created a significant diplomatic incident without prior approval from any relevant governing body. It was placed in my permanent file. 6 months after that, I received the UNSA Distinguished Service Medal. The citation was 9 paragraphs long. Bureaucracy, I have found, is a system in which the left hand and the right hand are not always aware of each other, but both of them eventually arrive at the truth. The Concord did not collapse. The Morith did not change overnight. The rules that had stripped the Velhari and the Rathani and the Kos and the Thuval of their standing did not vanish. The galaxy did not rearrange itself. What happened was smaller than that, and also, I think, larger. Other species started watching us differently. Not because we were powerful, we were not, particularly. Not because we were wise. Anyone who has spent significant time with humans knows that wisdom is something we produce occasionally, between long stretches of being wrong. They watched us because we had done something they could not quite place in any of their existing categories. We had looked at a situation where the legal answer and the moral answer were pointing in opposite directions, and we had made a choice, and then we had simply stayed there while the consequences arrived. We had not needed a treaty to do it. We had not needed a vote. Laura Finch had turned her ship around because she heard a message on an emergency frequency and recognized something in it. George Calloway had sat on an open channel and breathed for 17 minutes because he understood, at some deep level that did not require explanation, that presence is a kind of statement. Eli Marsh had brought me a coffee and stayed because sometimes staying is the whole job. We are not a tidy species. We are loud and contradictory, and we change our minds constantly, and our history is full of decisions we spend generations trying to live down. The Concord measured all of that and called it a flaw. What they did not measure, because they did not have an instrument for it, is what that history costs a species and what it eventually builds in them. The weight of it, the way it sits in the body across generations. The way my great-grandmother's rubber boat was still, in some sense, in the room with me when I opened that channel to Veth Quran at 3 in the morning. They called us culturally volatile. They said we were too inconsistent to be trusted. What they missed is that we are a species that has spent 10,000 years arguing with ourselves about who deserves to come through the door. We have been wrong more times than we can count. We have closed the door on people and paid the full price of understanding what that meant. And so when the door appears in front of us again, and someone is standing on the other side of it with their feathers gone the color of ash, and 312 people behind them who are technically no one, we do not need a directive. We do not need a committee. We do not need to check the paperwork. We know this moment. We have seen it from every angle there is to see it from. We open the door. That is the whole story. That is all of it. A ship came in without a signal at 3 in the morning, and a woman named Thesavi said we did not know you would do this, and the honest answer, the one I have had years to think about and still believe is true, is that we were not going to not do it. There was no version of that morning in which I looked at those 312 people and decided the paperwork was more important than they were. There was no version of that emergency frequency message in which Laura Finch kept her ship on course and felt fine about it afterward. Some things are not decisions. Some things are just what you are after everything that made you. We are the species that remembers the boat.